Session this afternoon, I have the distinct pleasure to introduce two of my good friends, Gardner Campbell from Baylor University and Jim Groom from University of Mary Washington. They require absolutely no introduction beyond that, so I will let them get on with the show. So please help me welcome these two guys.
Thank you, Cole. Thanks everybody for being here after lunch. This is always the great deadly zone where your blood sugar, my blood sugar, our biochemistry, the neurons. But we're going to forge through this. We're really going to make it. I've got a good feeling about this. Every presentation I've been in has something very striking in it for me. Sometimes it's ideas. Sometimes it's the level of innovation, just the sheer energy of innovation. Sometimes it's a little more close to the bone. The session that Lee Blackhall did, I don't know if he's in here now, but the session he did before lunch really struck me with a sense of frustration that I feel a lot. Maybe you do, that we live in an age of marvels and wonders that don't seem to be making a substantial difference in one of the most serious activities we engage in as human beings, education. There are a lot of reasons why that's no one's fault. There are a lot of reasons why that's everyone's fault. And there are lots of people we can point at and blame, sometimes justifiably so. But rather than round up the usual suspects, I have this sense of, what a waste. Why is this not happening? We've had the internet, we've had computers, we've had all of this amazing conversation at conferences like this about the possibilities. Is this making a difference? I mean, we can say, sure, we have success stories, but we keep thinking, when's the tide turn? When do we actually get to the place where we can say, yeah, we're on the upswing? Clay Shirky, in 2008, wrote, "We are living in the middle of the largest increase in expressive capability in the history of the human race." I think that's true, except I think probably we're at the beginning and not the middle. But this increase in expressive capability in the history of the human race ought to be the abiding, transforming concern of all education. Higher education is a place where we train people to be able to take advantage of this to the fullest and surprise us with the things we haven't discovered about what this can mean. But whatever it means, and we may disagree about what it means, look at that. I believe that that is true. It makes me do what I do. And yet, it's as if day after day, I say, well, I have a bag of gold. Would you like a bag of gold? And people say, where do you find time for bags of gold? Oh no, another currency to master. Gold, is that sustainable? Like, no, you spend it. Well, what would you spend it on? What would you like to spend it on? I don't have time for your philosophical questions, Gardner. It's a bag of gold. What part of that do you not understand? I love this. This is the Cortex A9, a chip that's in production. And I'm afraid that the audio here is not going to be sufficiently loud, so I'll just tell you what Adrian Cockcroft says. But if you really want to get the full spooky ride, go to the IT Conversations podcast. Have any of you heard him talk about millicomputing? He defines millicomputing as a computer that consumes less than 1 watt, will fit in your pocket, and it will not burn your leg. This chip is in production. It will appear in devices probably in the next year or so. It has 4 graphical processing units, each of which independently can process a full H.264 high-definition stream, encoding, decoding. He talks about the way that we're not going to carry computers in our pockets, we're going to carry web servers in our pockets. We're going to walk into a context and wirelessly link up with the things we want to do in that context. That's usually where I stop when I play this for faculty, because the next part is even spookier, in which he talks about the way these millicomputers will allow us to be in constant contact with a society of avatars in a virtual world who will be able, because of our wearable computing, to tap us on the shoulder and have a conversation with us while we're out here in real space as well. Now, to me, that could be a real bag of gold. Or maybe we don't have time to amplify our beings that way. I'm not saying that this is going to be easy or that it's not going to have problems or be fraught or spawn a whole new wave of cyber computing crime. But if it's going to happen, and there are great possibilities there, why does that not make a difference? You know, why hasn't that made people stop and say, oh, I guess I could recapture a sense of wonder under these circumstances? What do we believe? Today's technologies and their consequent environments succeed each other so rapidly that one environment makes us aware of the next. Technologies begin to perform the function of art in making us aware of the psychic and social consequences of technology. We are entering the new age of education that is programmed for discovery rather than instruction. Now we could, especially if we were in English faculty, wordsmith this, tinker with it. If this were a faculty senate, it would knock it out of committee. But probably we all believe some variety of that, some version of that. Or to put it another way, from the Renaissance, which is my favorite place to hang out, in the virtual space in my head, it's like the music of the spheres. In Shakespeare's The Merchant of Venice, the young Lorenzo woos his sweetheart with talk of the stars. But is that scalable? Well, never mind. There's not the smallest orb which thou beholdst, but in his motion like an angel sings, still choiring to the young-eyed cherubims. Such harmony is in immortal souls. But whilst this muddy vesture of decay doth grossly close it in, we cannot hear it. Melvin Bragg, in Our Time, in the episode on the music of the spheres, goes on to say, this is the music of the spheres, the idea that the stars and planets as they travel through space make beautiful music together. The music of the spheres played out of the classical world through the medieval period and into the Renaissance. It affords us a glimpse into minds for whom the universe was full of meaning, of strange correspondences and grand harmonies. I would like to graduate a generation of students who will help me hear strange correspondences and grand harmonies that I have not yet imagined. That's what I'm in it for. But, oh well, how are you going to protect privacy? This is a time of wonders. Usually, the printing press is adduced as an example of a disruptive technology on the order of what we're seeing now. No small disruption. The printing press started wars, overturned religious orthodoxy. The printing press meant that any fool with a piece of machinery could say anything, and how would you know? But I think the disruption's on a bigger scale. I think the disruption we're witnessing today is the disruption on the scale of the development of the written alphabet, of the phonetic alphabet. This was a huge deal. This was a technology invented to communicate with the dead. So, it's not like a tool. It's a meta tool. It's an alphabet. Well, what will I say with that? What do you want to say? I don't know. Just tell me what you want me to write. There's a great book, Marianne Wolfe, Proust and the Squid. She talks about the science of the reading brain, the fact that learning to read is something we do deliberately to rearrange our minds. We make new connections among the various perceptual centers in our brains that are not programmed in there. We seem to have a speech center as part of our evolved neuroanatomy, but not a reading center. We have to do things that don't happen naturally. But once we do those things, we find a bag of gold. Clay Shirky wrote a blog post that really rocked me back on my heels back in March on newspapers and thinking the unthinkable. Did any of you see that blog post? Yeah. He talks about the ways in which newspapers essentially played Nearer My God to Thee on the Titanic, and they thought they could nibble at the edges. Because nibbling at the edges, well, you don't have to take a big bite. You don't have to worry about indigestion. You don't have to worry about anything. You just take a little nibble. And while newspapers were nibbling at the edges in the 1990s, they stopped being a viable business model. This is Shirky's argument. His argument is not that journalism will go away, but that the coincidence of journalism and newspapers was historically conditioned and can go away historically. But the newspaper folks, like the professors, maybe like the ed tech folks, maybe like any of us in the room, tend to believe that we're in the domain because we're in the best of all possible domains. This is the way it has to be. Not so much. And Shirky coined the term, which really scared me to death, the digital facelift, for what newspapers tried to do. We'll just do what we did before, but we'll put it on the web. But it'll be what we had before. But we'll have some hyperlinks. But it'll be what we did before, etc. The digital facelift. Can that stand up against these items of belief? As the means of input increase, so does the need for insight or pattern recognition. Your mileage may vary. I think that's true. The school dropout situation will get very much worse because of the frustration of the student need for participation in the learning process, which is not a new need, but it's a need that had to take some pretty distorted forms during the industrial age. As we tried to figure out scaling and sustainability, we did the best we could, but if we find out that maybe that's not the way to go forward, change has to happen. But it's not happening yet. Instead, we get the digital facelift. Now, I have to tell you, first of all, this is from Brazil, a film by Terry Gilliam, which I saw for the first time when it came out. I saw it, it's probably been 10 or so years since I've seen it, but under the intoxicating effect of the Reverend, I knew that I would have to make a pilgrimage to see Brazil again, and I found that it told the story of my life today, maybe yours. Here's the thing that I didn't remember about this scene. She is loving this experience. To us, it looks grotesque. To her, well, she's getting off. She has multiple opportunities to continue to examine her increasingly grotesque self in the pursuit of an illusion. And she's deriving intense pleasure from it. Because see how it's framed. This is great. What I am doing to you as I stretch your features out of recognition is great. This digital facelift, you look marvelous. You can't really see it because of the lights, but he's got these clips that he's holding her face back with. This is where she really gets excited. And then finally, to make sure it stays the way it should, he puts saran wrap around it. I assure you there are no FERPA problems with that digital facelift. Problem solved. Or perhaps the digital facelift is like this poor lady in Brazil who has immense faith in her doctor, who is a maverick. He's an innovator. He doesn't go along with the flow. He has a special chemical process. Now, it's taking a little while, and she has very delicate skin, so her results are not coming out exactly the way she had imagined. Notice the lovely seepage around the bandages, the IV, the fact she's now in a wheelchair and blind, apparently, with some kind of support for her chin. She's not in very good shape, but she's hanging in. She's a believer. Maybe she's got the wrong guru, because eventually this is what happens with her digital facelift. They have a memorial service for her. It's a relatively gruesome affair because that's what's happened in the end. It's just coming apart. It's a nightmare. Now, I'm not saying that the LMS will necessarily get us to this. I'm just saying. So what do we do instead of having a digital facelift? I propose 3 recursive practices. These practices feed on each other. They're what we do in education anyway, but they can be amplified by information and communication technologies. One is narrating. Having the students, having the teachers, that's the real trouble, thinking aloud, willing to tell the story of the process of the learning, of the investigation. You could call it blogging. Curating. How do you take care of your stuff? Not to protect it, not even to make sure you can transcode it, those things are important, but how do you arrange it for the people who will come to see it, for yourself as you contemplate it? Now, as scholars, we're pretty used to the idea of curation that has to do with dissertations and scholarly articles and so forth. Many students, in my experience, come to college believing they have nothing to curate, and they will generate nothing to curate during their time in school. They will have transactional exchanges with professors who mark their work, and those pieces of paper get put in a box. I'd like students to think that they begin their life's work when they come to school. And then finally, sharing. Now that I have done it, now that I've arranged it, now that I have thought about it, I'm going to put it out there because it may be valuable to someone. Because I may find the unmet friend. Because, as was said so memorably by John Mott in his presentation, meaning happens when the two people connect. Very important. Much of the way education is set up militates against each of these, let alone all of them together. And yet we all know that one of the great things about the technologies we use, these information and communication technologies, is that they not only allow these things, they amplify them, they augment them, they turn them up to 11. They make that feedback happen. And when I try to explain this to my students, I inevitably go to Jimi Hendrix playing the Star-Spangled Banner at Woodstock. And they say, why are you showing us this? I say, because he knows how to control feedback. He knows how to play feedback. And that's what you need to know. The effects that get unleashed in this recursive practice, I think, are most powerful on the open web, using Web 2.0 affordances, or whatever the web is going to be as it goes forward, because the web is not just a platform for these things, it is the natural outgrowth of our desire for these things. That makes the web itself recursive. And students have an intimation of that, you know? They have a feeling about that from their own use of social media, but they think that somehow that's, I don't know, that couldn't be right. And they get to college and they find out, no, that really isn't right. We have a template for you, young man. But I think their intimations are correct. So what's the answer? I don't have it. However, here is a framework for thinking about this is what I use when I try to dream as big as I can. I try to think about helping students understand cyber infrastructure and how to build one for themselves, to be able to be architects of their own digital lives, which will mean as we go forward that they need to be worrying about the things that we worry about, but productively together, narrating, curating, sharing. This is a definition of cyber infrastructure from the American Council of Learned Societies in their report on cyber infrastructure called Our Cultural Commonwealth. Cyber infrastructure is something more specific than the network itself, but it is something more general than a tool or a resource developed for a particular project, a range of projects, or even more broadly, for a particular discipline. That's the sweet spot. It's not just the network, it's more specific than that, yet it's not so specific that it's simply the tool you use for a particular project or a domain. Something like an alphabet. Anybody in here play Littlebigplanet? Littlebigplanet people, raise your hands. Okay, good. Littlebigplanet people, grab onto the little sponge. Littlebigplanet is a game done by a company called Media Molecule for the Sony PlayStation 3. So it's commercial, it's proprietary, etc. That said, Littlebigplanet is not the only game to build authoring tools into the game, but it's one of the most conspicuously successful at doing that. That means when you buy Littlebigplanet, you buy the game and within the game, the tools to make more levels for that game. In other words, you're able to be within that environment and be both a participant and a producer if you choose to be. When you make the new levels, you can upload them to the Media Molecule server. Now, yes, they're getting great business advantage from this, but look at the way they're framing it. You upload it to the server, then people can find you by author's name, they can find you by ranking, you can tag them, ingenious, fun, creepy, boring, brilliant, wow, all right? You can favorite the ones you like the best. In about a year and a half, 1 million levels have been uploaded to the Littlebigplanet server at Media Molecule. 1 million. Let's say that Ted Sturgeon's law is true and 90% of them are piffle. That's still 100,000. And because my son is very patient with me as a learner, though I am slow, the bonds of love mean that he is going to be there for me. He has taken me through some of these user-generated levels. And you know, they're really diverse, and they're really cool, and they're really interesting. They are examples of an outpouring of creativity in what James G. calls the producerly mode in a subdomain of the larger domain. You could call it undergraduate research. You could call it service learning. You could call it situated cognition. You could call it any number of things. It's cool. It's fun. It's work. It involves the whole person. There's got to be a way that we can make this happen in education more consistently than it does, or at least to think about it in these terms so kids don't lose hope. Here's a Littlebigplanet. It's the graphical user interface called cPanel for the hosting service at Bluehost, which is where I've got my stuff. And my stuff is there. I have backups of my stuff. You know, I trust no one, be a little skeptical, and yet I'm committed. Here are the things I can do with the graphical user interface. At the level of a systems administrator or someone who plays one through a GUI, here are the things that I need to think about. Now look at this. This allows me to be producerly at the level of the server for my own digital life. There's a getting started wizard. Okay, that's fine. I need to know about changing passwords. I hope sometime my students think about changing languages. That would be cool, etc. Email, managing your own email. But you can have, what, 1,000, 2,000 email boxes in here. Your file system, they've got to know about that. These are not terribly difficult things, but they are important, and taken as a system, they become more important. I'd like my students to have a digital presence where they can track who comes to see them. It's an important part of the narrating, curating, and sharing. And it can all be automated, of course, and you've got a choice among several. Security, we'd want our students to think about that, right? But I want them to think about it as digital citizens, architects of their own cyberspace, not as people who have to find the website that tells them what safe computing is about at our school. That should go without saying because they're thinking about this already. They're going to have multiple domains, or they should. Data literacy is vital. Can they have a nodding acquaintance with databases? Sure. And then the software down here, well, this is kind of interesting, software and services. One click, which blogging platform would you like? Try out several. Groupware, live chat, utilities, content management, client management. Do they have to do all of those? No. Do they have to read all the books in the library? No. Do they have to take all the courses in the catalog? No. Well, why do we have more there? To amplify the possibilities. To give them some room to roam, some room for discovery, a place to play. I mean, those of you who've heard either Jim or me or Martha Burtis or anybody talk about the Bluehost experiment at Mary Washington, where we essentially let the staff loose in this environment, this is the next step for that in my own Littlebigplanet. Put the students in this kind of sandbox. Let them play, let them innovate, let them discover. What if you give it to 4,000 students and there were only 100 works of staggering genius emerging? Oh, well, that would be okay. More scripts, e-commerce, marketing, photo galleries, webmail, website builders, a couple of wikis. And of course, you can get in there and install your own. They don't have a one-click install for MediaWiki, which is a regrettable omission, but you can get in there. That's pretty outlandish. When we were at South by Southwest, somebody very, in some high dudgeon, I would say, at the end of the presentation said, "Are you saying that our students need to be system administrators?" And I thought about it, and my first impulse was, oh, no, that would be extreme. And then I thought about it twice, and I said, yes, actually, that's what I want them to be. System administrators. If it's easy enough to do, which that graphical front end makes it, and if system is understood not just as a particular installation, but as a metaphor for their digital lives. They're going to have to be system administrators for their digital lives. What are they going to do when they graduate? What are they going to do when they're raising children? None of this is going to roll back as we move forward. Every book will be digitized. Every journal will be digitized. That's a good thing, potentially, but only if people are able to think about this in this personal way. When radar was new, it was found necessary to eliminate the balloon system for city protection that had preceded radar. The balloons got in the way of the electric feedback of the new radar information. You get that? The advanced defensive capability was stymied by the old defensive capability. Such may well prove to be the case with much of our existing school curriculum. I think that's true. Let's talk about openness a little bit. What does it mean to be open? When we talk about openness, we usually think about open to the world. Everybody can see it. That's where you're going to be exposed to the most massive network effects. So I like this, obviously. I think a lot of us here do, although there have been some really good interrogations of the idea. But there are other levels of openness as well. Or to put it another way, places that are closed where we can't see that things are closed. What about being open to each other in a learning community? What about the teacher open to the learner and the learners open to each other? To what extent does a Blackboard discussion forum make the participants actually open to each other? To what extent are learners ready to talk about their vulnerabilities to the teacher? And maybe they're not willing to do that because the teacher is not willing to talk about his or her vulnerabilities to the learner. Vulnerabilities are fine. That's actually where the learning happens. To know as we are known requires identity markers. This is a non-trivial factor. Any adult who says this is a trivial factor has forgotten what it was like to decorate a locker. Or is denying the fact that they actually agonized over the choice of the welcome mat for their front door. These are non-trivial factors. And then finally, open to ourselves. To what extent do the learning experiences we co-create or impose open us up to self-awareness or metacognition? The thing about the personal cyber infrastructure is that once the students have begun to build it, it can then be the object of narration, curation, and sharing itself at a meta level. Let's get together and talk about the cyber infrastructure you built. Why did you build it that way? What does that represent about you as a learner or as an architect? What about the one I built? What if we modularize it and we start swapping among ourselves, like levels of a game, where we can rank the efficacy of various modules we've built on our own and together? Then you learn something about yourself. That would be okay. This is a discussion forum in Blackboard. It looks like email. Why does it look like email? That's a rhetorical question. It's perfectly transactional. It moves data from one point to another. The trouble is, that's not a learning community. Where's the decorated locker? Where's the doodle on the notebook? Where's the marker of identity? Well, it's here. PHP-BB, one-click install from cPanel. Oh, you can have an avatar. Oh, you can choose a username. Oh, you can have a SIG file, a non-trivial marker of identity. It looks nicer. Oh yeah, this post was Wednesday, January 16th, 2008, January 18th, 2008, January 16th, 2008, while the class was going on. That forum kept active for about 6 months after the class was over. Why? I set it up, but I did not choose the templates for their expressions of themselves and their identity in that space. There was enough openness that they could decorate their lockers. Suddenly the forum belonged to them. Well, that was kind of interesting. This thread belonged to them too, by the way, but that's another story. What do we believe? The aspiration of our time for wholeness, empathy, and depth of awareness is a natural adjunct of electric technology. The mark of our time is its revulsion against imposed patterns. We are suddenly eager to have things and people declare their beings totally. There is a deep faith to be found in this new attitude, a faith that concerns the ultimate harmony of all being. Strike you as utopian? Strike you as a little overstated? Is it the music of the spheres? I think some kind of faith, something like this, underlies education, unless we think we're just training Pavlov's dogs. We want people who will find those strange correspondences and make them audible to each other and to us. Can a personal cyber infrastructure do it? I don't know. I've never gotten a chance to try that out. I know what happened when the staff did it at Mary Washington. It was not uniform, and the story that doesn't usually get told is that it took 2.5 years of kicking, screaming, biting, that's a metaphor. There was actually some screaming, of people saying, "How many minutes a day do you want me to blog, Gardner?" I got that, absolutely. I had to bite my tongue because I was about to say, I get that question from my students a lot, but that would have been bad. That would have been very, very bad. But it's the same idea. It's like, can I turn this into a transaction yet? Can I make this job into just a job of work? And, beneath all of that, there are all sorts of anxieties. There may be principled resistance. There could be a lot of things. So there was a long way to get there. But when we got there, well, we got there. And there are 5 more sitting back at the ranch who got there too. Perfect? No. Decisively different? Yeah. So is this our default? Is this critical thinking? I don't know. We live in a dangerous, risky environment full of people who are trying to manipulate us and pick our pockets. That's undeniably true. It is true that people acting in what they will say will be your best interests are hoping that at some point the Stockholm Syndrome kicks in, you identify with your captors and go willingly, enjoying the digital facelift or whatever it is. But this, for me, can't be the default. And part of why it's so exciting for me to be here at this conference is that there's another way to think about this. There's another way to think about confidence. Maybe narrating, curating, and sharing breed confidence. Western man acquired from the technology of literacy the power to act without reacting. Not a bad thing, as the writer points out. It's important that the surgeon not be overwhelmed by the task of performing the surgery. In the electric age, when our central nervous system is technologically extended to involve us in the whole of mankind and to incorporate the whole of mankind in us and make that humankind, we necessarily participate in depth in the consequences of our every action. That's what we all fear. It's what we all long for, I think. That somehow even the small things can be meaningful. Anybody who watches a Twitter stream during an Iran election wants to feel this way. It is no longer possible to adopt the aloof and dissociated role of the literate Westerner. Overstated? Sure. Extreme? Maybe. Aloof and dissociated role of the literate Westerner? Such is the faith in which this book was written. It explores the contours of our own extended beings and our technologies, seeking the principle of intelligibility in each of them. For me, the idea of the personal cyber infrastructure is about the search for the principle of intelligibility in our technologies. What the personal cyber infrastructure would be is a representation, a creative representation of that intelligibility, maybe of that search as well. In the full confidence that it is possible to win an understanding of these forms that will bring them into orderly service, I have looked at them anew, accepting very little of the conventional wisdom concerning them. I am glad that a Canadian did that. A Aside from the Clay Shirky, the quotations I read were from Marshall McLuhan, Understanding Media, 1964. I don't know what you knew about Marshall McLuhan when you were going through school. What I knew about him was that he had a cameo in Annie Hall. I was cheated in my education. Along with some genuinely bizarre things, there are genuinely prophetic things in this book, and I think they align very well with some of the sense of urgency and some of the scope of ambition that we all feel, that we all share at a conference like this. The personal cyber infrastructure may not be the only way to learn this alphabet, but I'd like to try sometime. Jim?
Rather than bore you with any of my details, let's not lose some of the threads of this. Does anyone have questions for Gardner? Yes, please. Do you want this? Just so the people on the video stream can hear you.
So I was wondering, some of the examples of software that you that's easily installable that you provided are forums or things like that. Now, if everybody has their own, some of these sort of become more useful in aggregate, right? So have you thought about sort of certain things being sort of, individual elements of a personal cyber infrastructure, others sort of aggregating or working across federation?
Excellent question. Yes, I have. In my dream world, the Student Bakers Club. That's for Brian Alexander, who's a champion baker and could not be here. Are you, Brian? I don't want your bread right now, but when you're well again, I'd like it. So the idea would be the Student Bakers Club gets together, and they talk about how they're going to organize. And of course, something's going to be online, because it needs to be, because of these affordances. One student says, I could put up a PHP BB forum. Another student says, yeah, and actually, did you know there was this add-on? Or this is, and as a group, they agree, one, it would be better to have one forum rather than multiple forums. Two, they aggregate their knowledge about what would be the best instance of that. Three, they put it together. And in doing that, the lights will go out. The tables will rise. We will join hands and sing. In doing that, what they will be doing is discussing a particular scripting affordance on a server, but they will be doing it strategically in terms of communication needs and organizational excellence. And they'll be doing something other than just staying at a kind of a surface level. Yeah, so that's one of the ways I imagine it, yeah.
So the sort of potential for sort of chaos within these groups would sort of be self-managed and self-sorted out?
Yeah, right.
Four people are posting on it. One guy's running the bulletin board. And I guess, not to sort of be completely contrarian, but IT departments do certain things quite well. I mean, they're large, they're sort of slow to move, but
Right.
They sort of have thought about sort of the trivial little things that could cause things to break.
Right. In my experience, IT departments will not have thought in a sophisticated way about how a blog and a discussion forum differ rhetorically, or how they might be able to shape student communication. And that's okay, in a way, as long as they don't prescribe the tools or limit the tools. I have an IT department at bluehost.com, and they're very good at keeping, things up to date, and the backups, they're usually very good at that, and so forth. So that's their work, but what they have done is provide me the affordances that I can explore. So, I think ideally, there would be some interest in the rhetorical questions in the IT shop. And by building a cyber infrastructure, the students would begin to understand something of what goes on mechanically as well. And there would be a greater opportunity for conversation. But, I think it would be okay if the students made something that broke. They would learn from that, I think.
And I also think, to build on what Gardner says and to kind of respond to your question, that the actual cyber infrastructure as posed within an individual and a domain and a space, allows IT departments to reimagine this question of aggregating and syndicating information as it's happening in their own space. So it doesn't mean like the IT department disappears or is somehow the enemy, but it allows them to reimagine this notion of flow and this kind of property of electricity that McLuhan is talking about so beautifully. And like, if we're talking about electricity and flow, we're talking about a new property by which we can start to imagine space through the students having their own. And so IT departments should be as much excited about the possibilities for this rather than pitting an age-old us against them. It's not. I mean, it's a kind of matter of us working together to reimagine this space. And I think that's why the immediate pullback to that doesn't capture, I think, what that model sets up as a notion and a mode of aggregation to kind of build into the syndication. You have your own cyber infrastructure, and then you reimagine it. And then IT departments are starting to think about what that means, right, in some real way. Okay. How much time do we have? Oh, good. Yes.
Great talk. I'm reminded of Larry Cuban's book, Teachers and Machines, which sort of talks about the resistance that the educational system has to the introductions of technology to changing the actual educational practice. I was wondering if you might comment on your thoughts about how the open educational resources movement might make a difference in overcoming that structural resistance.
Well, and this kind of loops into the IT question as well. I mean, it's very easy to paint faculty, stodgy faculty, as villains, and sometimes it's true. You know, it's easy to say that IT is the enemy because they can't think outside the box. Sometimes that's true. But there are plenty of people in both domains who, if they are able to see compelling examples of fresh thinking, will say, whoa, that's cool. I'd like to do that. I think that would have addressed what I was thinking about with my students just last semester. That would have gotten me past this point where I wasn't able to get them to read carefully before they'd come to class. But that, and this is one of the great sorrows for me as a faculty member with regard to learning management systems, aside from all the other sorrows, I can't see what my colleagues are doing. And I mean see it on the web so I can look at it carefully and speak to them intelligently about it. Why did you design it that way? What did you learn from it? And I think the same thing is true for IT folks. When they go to, I mean, I've been to some IT conferences and you know, a lot of times what they're hearing about are anecdotes of spectacular catastrophes or whatever, but you're not able to actually, and there may be good reasons for this to some extent, but they're not able to see dazzling examples of innovation in a very easily accessible way. So I think open educational resources is about a lot more than just exposing content. It's about exposing these compelling examples of other ways to do it. It's like being able to see multiple performances of Shakespeare. Oh, never thought about reading the line that way. Suddenly the whole play transforms. So I don't know if that answers your question, but yeah, okay. Yeah.
So Gardner and Jim, is it too late for them to become curators once they get into higher education? So, you know, cPanel for me, I could do that. I'm an IT guy. I think critically about affordances, but at the same time, is it too late? I mean, my daughter's 8. She has a blog, domain of her own. Shouldn't it be starting there? We get them for 4 years here, right? Right. Maybe 7. How do we drop down?
Well, didn't some like have, who sang, it's too late, too late. I mean, I don't know what that idea of too late means. I mean, we're always in medias res with this stuff. We're always coming into it and imagining it. And Gardner, to riff on Gardner and that whole idea of the IT is like, so many of the people who I've talked about and been inspired back are right here at UBC. Andre Malin, who's coming at this from an IT perspective, and it's just blowing my mind again and again. Scott McMillan. I mean, these are people who are in that space, who are seeing these examples, and who are kind of remixing it from this space to kind of think about, wow, we can actually play with these modes and reimagine them. And I think, wouldn't students also experience that at any given point in that kind of narrative?
I'm just thinking how much further we would be pushed in the academy if our students were coming to us thinking critically about
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's right. So there are a couple of things I want to say in response to that. One is that there is a developmental aspect in education, which is fine with me. What it means is, at every point along the learning continuum, it will be advantageous for a mentor, a guide, an expert, a teacher to be there to coach the student through their zone of proximal development. That's fine. Another way to say that is that I do not believe that students will make automatically on their own, through their own innate drive for self-improvement, all the best, choices. I think there's a role for teaching. Now, there's also the developmental capacity of the human mind. Kids at a certain age are able to distinguish like varying levels of volume in different sizes of containers. And at an earlier age, they're not able to. So something actually happens in the brain that makes that next thing kick in. So there's always going to be, it seems to me, some way in which the particular developmental moment will impose certain kinds of constraints. That said, and if anybody knows Jerome Bruner's idea of the spiral curriculum, this is where this comes from. There is an authentic version of any concept that can be taught to any child who can read and write. You pitch it to the appropriate level of development, and then you keep coming back to it, spiraling upward and upward and upward until that magic handoff moment, which I think often happens, should happen in the upper grades of high school. If it doesn't happen until college, it's still not too late. It's part of the great jolt I got when I got to college. I felt like they had handed the spiral to me. It's like, okay, we've brought you around, we brought you around, it's your spiral now. Keep finding the level of the concept that gets you to the next spot. Be your own coach through your own zone of proximal development. And this is something I left out, and I should put before you before we're done. This won't work unless it's baked into the curriculum. I don't want you to think that what I'm proposing is that kids just get assigned these web spaces and that's it, and they will somehow magically, through tinkering, come up with good stuff. This would be an amazing meeting ground for digital experts in the discipline, librarians, advisors, student life people, ed tech folks, instructional designers. Can you imagine? My feeling is students would come in and their whole first year experience would be digital fluency by means of building out this personal cyber infrastructure, the first iteration of it. Then at the end of your first year, let's have a ceremony, let's have a party. Pick the domain that's going to be your domain for the next 3 years and, make a decision there. It's a little coming of age, whatever. It's an occasion. You got to have these rites of passage. But for that whole first year, they're thinking about narrating, curating, and sharing for the rest of their lives as learners. And I think it could be pretty neat. I think it'd be kind of an interesting thing to do. I want to be on that team that works with students to say, hey, you're about to do work that you ought to be able to care about for the rest of your life, if you haven't done it already. And to get back to your original question, one of the gifted students that I've run across in my career is a fellow I just taught at Baylor last spring. He's got his own YouTube channel. Stop motion Lego animation. His most popular stuff gets 40, 50,000 views. That's been going on since he was 13 or 14. So yeah, what if that was baked into the curriculum in high school? Then they would push us. Absolutely. Yeah, okay. All right. Thanks.
Join me in thanking. Sorry, Brad.